Hey, everybody, thank you for joining our project update meeting for the Granville Avenue Traffic Safety Project. My name is Dave Smith with the Chicago Department of Transportation, joined by my colleagues at CDOT, Brad Huff and Gina, and our Deputy Commissioner, Molly Samadi, who I'll introduce in a couple of minutes. Really look forward to reviewing this presentation with everybody, providing an update and feedback on where we're at in the process. We'll recap why we're talking about traffic safety improvements on Granville, some of the issues that we will be addressing through this infrastructure project. We'll talk about timeline. We'll talk about next steps. We'll answer questions, a lot of frequently asked questions. We'll go over that. And then we'll really go into the design block by block so that people can see what will be happening in the summer of 2025. So with that, I will start out introducing Alderwoman Manaa-Hoppenworth of the 48th Ward. The way this presentation will be structured, roughly the first half or so, we'll be focusing on the segment of Granville to the east of Clark Street. So we'll start east around Kenmore and Winthrop and work our way west. But Alderwoman, do you want to say a couple of things?
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. It's Lenny Manaa-Hoppenworth, Alderwoman of the 48th Ward, Edgewater and Uptown. And I'm here to welcome you all here to the Granville Avenue Traffic Safety Updates. I see that we have at least 169 attendees today. This meeting will be recorded, so you can share this later. And I also want to remind folks that you can still submit any feedback about this project or anything else that's going on in the ward to the office, which is on Bryn Mawr, but our email is info@the48thward.org. I want to say thank you for the Deputy Commissioner from CDOT for being here, Molly Samadi, and the team, including Dave Smith. This project is addressing the traffic safety issues on Granville from Sheridan to Kedzie over 3 wards. And this is to support all the things that Chicago wants to ensure, which is safe passage through our streets, which is a network which should be accessible to many people, no matter how you get around, whether it's walking or rolling or riding your bike or driving a car. And we're going to, again, get into it in a few minutes here, but I just wanted to stress again that this is about your safety, about your neighbor's safety, especially the older adults and the younger folks in our neighborhood. This is you at the center of it. So again, I want to thank you all for being here. And with that, I will pass it off to Dave.
Thank you, Alderwoman, and appreciate the partnership with the ward office. As Alderwoman Manaa-Hoppenworth mentioned, safety, accessibility of the community is first and foremost on all of our minds, and we appreciate the partnership with everybody on this. Next, I'll introduce Molly Samadi, who is the Deputy Commissioner, Chief Traffic Engineer for the Chicago Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Alderwoman, and good evening to everybody. I just want to give a little bit of background at what we've been doing at CDOT and how this project has come about. So as some of you may know, Complete the Street mission and mission statement, policy statement started in 2016 with then Commissioner Gabe Klein. He basically challenged us to come up with the hierarchy of road users at the time. As you may be able to know, that the hierarchy starts with pedestrians first, transit users next, and bicyclists, and then automobilists. With these hierarchy, we challenged our planners and engineers to think outside the box and stay away from car-centric planning and design. So with that challenge, we start moving ahead with our projects at CDOT. And I'm sure that you have seen some of our projects throughout the city, actually. We've been continuing with these completely city projects everywhere, as I mentioned, and we were also mandated by City Council to use some of these complete street tools in our small scale and larger scale projects, whether it is the paint post or resurfacing projects or construction projects. Use these tools to calm traffic and protect vulnerable users of the road, which are our children, people with disabilities, bicyclists, and pedestrians. So as part of that, we've been working with City Council, and we have already deploying these throughout the city. And as part of that, and since it should be result-oriented, we have also established annual crash report that we report to City Council. And the latest one that we issued was on 2023 crash report that was issued in 2024. And it shows that nationwide, while the fatalities are 5%, City of Chicago is lower than, has reduced the fatalities by 27%. So that means that things that we are doing, it's working. Basically, creating community that is livable, streets that is walkable, and Granville is as part of this the citywide project, which they've received complaints about crashes, type of crashes, and looking at the crashes, actually we see that because of the cut-through traffic, the volumes are higher than the numbers that is required for a narrow street like Granville, that is just a neighborhood local street. And the crashes are basically testament to what is happening on this street. The type of crashes that they're experiencing is parked cars, side swipes, even side streets cannot even enter Granville, and that's why you see a high level of angle crashes. So the team will walk you through the project, but basically this is one of the locations that it came about, and we noticed a lot of crashes and complaints, and so this is what the project basically started with. And so we appreciate the basically working with your community and also all the women to make this project come to fruition. Thank you.
Molly, and just to reiterate something that Molly mentioned, the work that we're doing around complete streets and traffic safety, which is represented in this Granville project, it's working. It's having the impact that we want it to have and that it's intended to have. It's making these types of projects are making our streets and communities safer and more accessible. Molly mentioned the city of Chicago outperforming the rest of the country and really all of our peer cities around the country in terms of traffic fatality reduction over the last several years. And so that's our commitment to the city of Chicago, and this project is very much representative of that. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to split this up a little bit and start with some updates to the project. We last met in October at Misericordia. We had, well over 200 people in attendance. It was a very good, productive meeting. We collected a lot of feedback, a lot of data points. So we'll provide some updates. Then we'll walk through the project, what the project will look like, starting at Kenmore and Winthrop and going west to Clark Street. After that point, we'll pause and we will go through and answer relevant questions that folks have typed in. And so you should see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type in questions into that box that will be monitored, and we'll use that as the basis for responding to questions. We'll also, throughout the presentation, may address, several questions as well. Once we get to that point, then we'll pick back up with walking through the project west of Clark Street. And then at the end of the very end of the meeting, we'll happy to do another round of questions if there still are outstanding questions for the segment west of Clark Street. So just to ground us a little bit, for those who are new to the project, we're talking about a very long stretch of Granville, a little under 3 miles from roughly Sheridan, really Kenmore, Winthrop on the east, all the way to Kedzie on the west. And you can see on the map here that Granville provides a connection to multiple schools, multiple parks, the Red Line station at Broadway, a nice and short distance from the new Peterson Metro station, multiple bicycle routes throughout the city, and gets you very close to the North Shore Channel Trail on the west. And as was mentioned by Alderwoman Manaa-Hoppenworth and Deputy Commissioner Samadi, there have been a lot of concerns, longstanding concerns around accessibility and safety issues around Granville, particularly because it is a narrow neighborhood street, because there are multiple schools and parks with children and seniors walking along the street, commercial districts on Broadway, Clark Street, and others that people are accessing and using Granville to access. And so the issue of traffic safety and overall organization of the street has been something that has been on the minds of people within the community. When we dig into the traffic crash data for the city of Chicago and we look at neighborhood streets, much of Granville is within the top 10% of local neighborhood streets where traffic crashes are occurring. And when we start looking at and zooming into the surrounding neighborhood, a disproportionately large number of those of traffic crashes and traffic injuries happening within the community are happening on Granville versus any other of the neighborhood streets. What we see on Granville and throughout the city is that our vulnerable roadway users are most impacted and most harmed when traffic crashes occur. And we'll get into some of those stats. When we look at the neighborhood, which we would define as the streets between Devon and Peterson, and basically the length of Granville, over half of all pedestrian and bicycle crashes that are occurring in the neighborhood are happening on Granville. And that's because Granville needs to be a community street. It's a street that connects people to important destinations. People of all modes of transportation are using the street. And the combination of the width of the street, which is narrow, with the volume of traffic on the street, with the speed at which some people are driving, and the land use and other and activities of people are all resulting in too many traffic crashes happening, and over half of all pedestrian and bicycle crashes in the neighborhood happening on Granville. When we dug into the data, what we found is that an incredibly high number of drivers who are striking individuals and injuring them in their car, those people do not live in the neighborhood. So about 88% close to 90% of drivers who are injuring people on Granville are coming from outside of the neighborhood. It's just another indication of what we've heard time and time again about concerns around cut-through traffic, people using Granville for much longer distances than you should be on a typical residential street. And when we started this project in 2024, we established these 4 goals, reducing those longer non-local trips while still maintaining neighborhood access, encouraging predictability along the street, better organizing Granville. As we've mentioned, it's a very narrow street, changes a little bit in widths, and we'll talk about that as we look block to block, but it's a narrow street, parking on both sides of the street, generally, at least east of Western. And you have schools that get chaotic during pickup and drop-off times. And so overall, the street is very unorganized, and that is really something that I think a lot of people have aligned around and a benefit of this project. And then the 4th goal, enhancing accessibility to support all the ways in which people are using Granville to get to the Red Line, to get to schools, to get to their homes. So making sure that, as Molly talked about, that the street is really a complete street and is inviting, comfortable, and safe for everybody, whether you're walking, accessing transit, riding a bicycle, or driving a car. And some of these stats we've talked about in the previous meeting, but you can see here just the number of crashes, traffic crashes happening, close to 200 people injured the past 5 years. I mentioned, you can see on the bottom left, 88% of drivers who are causing injuries living outside of the neighborhood. The disproportionality of vulnerable users, the bottom right, the percentage of people walking and biking make up under 10% of all the crashes, but are representative of over 40% of those who are injured. And since we last met in October, in just the last few months, there have been an additional 63 crashes that have taken place on Granville per the Chicago Police Department, including 14 people injured, 16 hit and run crashes, about half of those occurring during the hours of pickup and drop off. We've heard from a parent of a student in the neighborhood. Their child was biking to school on Granville, got hit and significantly injured while riding their bike to school. Since the meeting, there was a report that we saw of a mother crossing the street with her 3 children, getting hit by a car, hit and run crash. So these are real issues that continue to happen, and we are fully committed as a department to making the street safer and more accessible through this project. But we definitely feel a sense of urgency, as we've said throughout this project, and we are committed to implementing the traffic safety program on Granville. And as I mentioned, October 15th, we met at Misericordia, over 200 people in attendance, met for a couple of hours, had a presentation. We had over a dozen staff from CDOT, posters, printouts, collected a bunch of comments, talked with people, and the overwhelming feedback that we got at that meeting was expressing support for the project. And we know that there are a variety of perspectives on this project and what we're proposing. Not everybody agrees with it, but we've taken all of those perspectives into account. We've looked at this project holistically. We've looked at the corridor holistically, and we have an understanding of what the issues are and how we can address those. And the project that we are moving forward with in 2025 is reflective of those issues that are happening on the street and will result in a safer and more accessible Granville and a more connected and enjoyable community. And a lot of the support for the project that we heard was that, yes, everything you're saying makes sense. People aren't stopping at stop signs. There's a lot of kids. There's a lot of seniors to the west of Ridge. The street is unorganized. It's narrow. Parked cars my mirrors are getting hit, getting damaged. I can't trust parking my car on the street. Though all of what we are talking about, many people are confirming as their experience living on Granville or living in the community. I mentioned, there's a ton of families in the community. Just in the last couple of months, 2 families significantly impacted by traffic crashes. We've heard this time and time and again. And we've heard from a number of people who have wrote us or have told us that, at first I was concerned about the idea of converting some targeted segments to one-way designations, but after spending some time on the corridor, thinking through it, this seems like a reasonable proposal. And we think it is, and it's really what is required to address the issues that we are seeing out there. And we've also heard a lot of questions, and we'll walk through these over the next few slides. But some of the most common questions that we've heard, why are there so many crashes on Granville? Isn't it a quote, collector street? Can it be reclassified? How will this impact traffic in the neighborhood? Can you achieve the same project goals with only doing traffic calming elements? Will this impact emergency services? So we'll walk through these over the next few slides, but we will also have, after the meeting, we will post a FAQ or frequently asked questions sheet with these and many other questions that we've received throughout the process. We'll add anything post this meeting to that list, but that resource will be available for people to go to and to reference in the coming months. So why are so many crashes occurring on Granville? Well, it's really a combination of the width of the street, the narrow width of the street, the number of people using the street, the speeds at which some people are driving, and then the amount of activity that is happening on Granville. It really is a community street, as we said. You combine all of these things together, and the result is far too many traffic crashes happening. And we're seeing traffic crashes of all kinds. Sideswipe traffic crashes, which is an indication that the street's too narrow to accommodate the amount of two-way traffic that's on the street. Parked car crashes, bicycle, pedestrian crashes that I mentioned, rear end crashes, angled crashes, people not stopping at stop signs. All of these data points go into formulating a holistic and comprehensive proposal to make the street safer and more accessible. One of the other things that people have asked you say Granville's a residential street, isn't it a quote collector street? And the answer is very simple. It is not. Granville is a local neighborhood street. This is defined by the FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, through IDOT to CDOT. Generally, half-mile streets are considered arterial and collector streets, so like Devon and Peterson. It's recognized at every level of government as a local neighborhood street. And as FHWA notes that local streets are, quote, not intended for use in long-distance travel. They often are designed to discourage through traffic. And because this has been a question that's been asked multiple times, this is a map of what is called functional classification, which defines the designation of streets. And you can see all the different colors on the maps, the greens and the reds and the pinks. Those are different collector and arterial streets. We've boxed out Granville in black to show that it has no designation, which means it's a local road or a neighborhood street, just like all the other neighborhood streets in the area. And we're not going to just change Granville to be a collector street. It doesn't make sense. There's no context in which Granville would be considered a collector street. It's a neighborhood street. It doesn't meet any of the requirements. It doesn't even make sense. When you look at collector streets around the city, collector streets are generally 10 to 14 feet wider than Granville. So it's without a doubt a neighborhood street. And as we've mentioned, really the mismatch between the narrow width of the street, the amount of people driving on it for too long of distances, combined with the amount of activity is really resulting in a high number of crashes. One of the other questions, can you achieve the same project goals with only the traffic calming elements? So things like speed humps and curb extensions and not doing the targeted one-way designations? And the answer is no. We have to take a comprehensive and a holistic approach to addressing not just speeds on Granville, but also the volume of traffic. The number of vehicles using Granville, it far exceeds what you would see on a local neighborhood street. And by addressing the issues of the volume of two-way traffic, it allows us to better organize the street, create a more predictable, consistent street and environment within the community. One of the other questions that people have asked about is how will this project impact traffic in the neighborhood? And so this graphic here shows where traffic from Granville will be filtered onto our arterial streets or our more major streets. So starting from the west, eastbound traffic would be filtered onto either Western Avenue or to Ridge Street or to Clark Street. And westbound traffic would be filtered onto either Broadway or Clark Street. Now, people have expressed concern around, well, where does that traffic go? Well, a couple of points. One, when we say that there's too much traffic on Granville, it's too much traffic in the context of a residential neighborhood street, but it's a very small amount of traffic in the context of the surrounding network. And so a lot of trips, non-local trips, will simply be diverted or filtered out to the arterial street network. That could be Devon, it could be Peterson, it could be Western, it could be down to Foster or up to Pratt or to other streets north and south. But we anticipate that there's going to be a lot of traffic that will filter out of the neighborhood, and people will make decision points, especially those who are using Granville for longer distances, to use other streets within the network. Again, the amount of traffic that we're talking about filtering off of Granville is not a lot in terms of the context of the neighborhood. And one of the advantages in this sense is that the other residential streets that are adjacent to Granville, very few, if any, really provide any type of connectivity. You don't have, many of them don't have traffic signals or stop signs at the major streets. So there's very little benefit to using these other streets as any type of cut through traffic. People who are using Granville today to get to destinations that are not within the community, there's going to be zero advantage to using any of these other smaller streets like Hood or Norwood, or Hoyne, etc. Now, all of these streets within the community, we've done a lot of data collection, and we'll continue to do that. We'll do that after the project as well. But all of the streets within the community are within the capacity of a typical neighborhood street, meaning that the number of people driving on those streets is well below the typical, what we would call the capacity or the ability for that street to handle that amount of traffic. The one street that is an exception to that is Granville. After this project, every street within the community, every neighborhood street will be under the capacity of a neighborhood street. There will not be one adjacent street that will be flooded with vehicle traffic or bear the brunt of this. A lot of the traffic that will be no longer will be filtered off onto the arterial street network. When we implement these types of one-way designations, these get routed to Google Maps and to other wayfinding apps, and people will follow those and go to the arterial network. There will be no advantage to using a small residential street with speed humps as an alternative to Granville. One of the other questions that we've gotten frequently is, will these changes to Granville impact emergency services? No. Emergency access will be preserved throughout the whole corridor in all directions, even including locations that are designated as one-way streets. We've worked with the fire department to understand the specifications for their largest fire vehicles, and those have all been modeled at the intersection, so emergency services can travel in both directions at every intersection. And by actually reducing the traffic volume and better organizing, particularly the busiest intersections, this is going to be a more organized street and actually provide more space for emergency access to get through the corridor. As I mentioned, we've done a lot of data collection, traffic counts along the corridor, a lot of observations, but post-implementation, we will continue that to look at some before and after studies and really get a good sense of how this project is benefiting the community, and if there are streets or areas that we need to work together on to take a look at and to supplement. That is something that we will absolutely do. So we don't just walk away from a project, but the partnership will continue on even after the project. And since we last met in October, there's been a lot of work that's been happening, reviewing comments that we received during the first meeting and throughout. We've been meeting with the schools. We had a recent very good meeting with the Haight School and the Northside Catholic Academy, who are very much supportive of this project and excited around how this will improve access and operations for the school. We've refined the design at the major intersections to accommodate emergency operations in both directions, as I mentioned. And so we'll walk through all of these in a second here. The quick overview of the project. There's traffic calming, pedestrian safety elements. Throughout the project, there are short one-way targeted conversions to one-way streets, and those really work together as a system. And as we go through this, I think you'll see that the importance of doing all four of these intersections together, because that's how you reduce the likelihood or the ability for someone to use any of the neighborhood streets as a cut through, and really maximizes the effectiveness of what we're talking about. Speed humps, crosswalk markings, bicycle route markings and signs are also included. And as I mentioned, we have a sense of urgency to improve traffic safety on Granville. We will be moving forward with what we are presenting tonight. This will be happening. Installation will occur during summer break in 2025. So as soon as CPS the school year is out, then we'll be coordinating the implementation of this project, working with the schools on their summer programming to make it as accommodating as possible for summer activities. But the goal is to start after the school year and to finish before the school year starts. And we'll keep coordinating with the wards and providing information and details around construction timing and updates. So to start, east of Clark, at Kenmore and Winthrop, something that we've heard from the neighbors along Sheridan is concerns around pedestrian safety along Sheridan. There's a few different efforts going on right now with the block club groups and the 48th Ward and CDOT along Sheridan to program a series of pedestrian improvements. We've heard about concerns around people biking on the sidewalk to access the lakefront trail to the south. And so this project will very clearly connect people from Kenmore and to Winthrop along Granville. So we'll have striped bike lanes connecting into the Kenmore and Winthrop bicycle routes. We'll use green pavement markings to really highlight that connection to encourage people to use Kenmore and Winthrop versus the sidewalk on Sheridan. And there will also be a series of bicycle route signs that will clearly connect people to those designated bicycle routes. And then as we get to the Broadway intersection here, though the marked bike lanes will continue to the intersection. East of Broadway, parking lanes will be striped. It's a little bit more business corridor in nature to the east of Broadway. And west of Broadway, you really have that neighborhood feel start. And so the east leg of Broadway will remain as a two-way street, both eastbound and westbound vehicle traffic. And the west leg of the intersection from Lakewood to Broadway will be converted to a one-way eastbound for general purpose automobile traffic. And so there will be, if you are riding a bike, there will be what we call a contraflow bike lane, which allows you to bike in both directions on the street. And that would be on the north part of the street. You can see that towards the top of the screen. The blue space on the west leg of the intersection will be raised concrete. So that will function as a pedestrian refuge space or a curb extension. So as a pedestrian, if you're walking along Broadway, if you're walking from north to south, you can simply cross the bike lane space and then have a raised concrete island that you can stand in when you have the walk signal. Then you can proceed crossing the street. So it helps to shorten the crossing distance for a pedestrian, improve the visibility of pedestrians, and it also helps to slow down turns. In this case, people driving eastbound and then turning left to go north on Broadway. And then the bike lane will be marked green through the intersection in both directions. The westbound bike lane it's routed behind that concrete island and then turns into the contraflow bike lane. We have a very similar setup like this on Glenwood at Ridge, if folks in the neighborhood could picture that. And so on this short one-way segment, parking lanes will be striped, pedestrian crosswalks will be marked, parking will stay the same on both sides of the street. There will be a contraflow bike lane going westbound, what we call shared lane markings going eastbound. And then once you get to west of Lakewood, Granville will be a two-way street as it is today. And so we'll be refreshing all of the pavement markings on the street, the stop bars, the crosswalks. We'll add in bicycle symbols and signage to indicate that it's a bicycle route, pedestrian crossings, speed limit signs, things like that. And then when we get to the Glenwood intersection, we have the North Side Academy on both the north and south side of the street. And we've talked multiple times with the school about patterns around pickup and drop off and during the day because they have facilities on both the north and south side of the street. There's a lot of students crossing the street here on the west leg of the intersection throughout the day. So we've worked with the school also to implement bicycle racks on the outside of the building as well to help with kids biking to school. But on this west leg of the intersection, we'll be implementing what we call a raised crosswalk. And this will essentially elevate pedestrians as you're crossing the roadway so that as a pedestrian walking north and south, you remain at pedestrian height throughout the whole crossing. As a motorist, you have to come up to that pedestrian space. So it's sort of reverse the typical crossing. So this will really help reinforce the stop sign at the school. It will act as essentially like a speed bump. It'll improve the visibility of pedestrians. And I think this will be a really nice feature for the corridor, but also for the school community at Northside Catholic. And then continuing west, the street will remain two-way. And when we get to the Greenview intersection is when we get to Haight School. And so these couple of blocks here has been a big source of disorganization on the street. And I think that this will really help with school operations in the morning and afternoon. And the school operations, it's not, in this case, it's not necessarily just your 20 or 30 minutes in the morning. It extends much later into the morning with school buses lining up along the north curb. Because of the narrow width of Granville, when you have school buses lined up along the north curb, you have westbound traffic trying to go around the school buses. But today, since it's two-way, you have eastbound traffic trying to get through, and nobody can really navigate around each other. So this will really streamline school operations and just overall traffic flow at this intersection. We've included a speed hump in front of the school to help ensure predictable speeds. The speed humps that we'll be installing on Granville, they very typical to what we install along many neighborhood greenways. It's a little bit of a longer speed hump. It's a lot more comfortable to ride your bicycle over, and it's really targeted at driving speeds around like 12 miles an hour or so. The idea is creating a predictable and safe driving speeds throughout the whole corridor. So the one-way designation will start at Greenview, and that will be a westbound to Clark Street. We've got an eastbound contraflow bike lane and a striped parking lane along the south curb, as you can see. The speed hump, and then that will take us to the Clark Street intersection. I mentioned earlier that we had a good meeting with Haight Elementary. We've had several good meetings with them. This is something that the school is very much supportive of, and I think will really help out with their pickup and drop off operations. We're going to continue to meet with the school in advance of summer break to talk about other concerns around the school, talk about summer programming, but we'll continue that partnership post-installation to see if there's other things that can be done around the school, even possibly temporary, just during pickup and drop-off hours. So from Greenview to Clark Street, Granville will be one-way westbound. Have the contraflow bike lane going eastbound. Within the Clark Street intersection, we will be building out the center medians to create pedestrian refuge space to help shorten the crossing distance. The Haight attendance boundary extends west of Clark Street, so you have a lot of students crossing east and west. So this will be really nice. And the west leg of the intersection will be designated as an eastbound street. So at this point, if you're on Granville, you are getting filtered off onto Clark Street and onto the arterial network. So you turn either right or left. This intersection, as I mentioned, has been designed using specifications from the fire department. We've got the fire station on Clark Street just to the south, and fire trucks will be able to turn both right or left from Clark Street in all directions. This has been designed to accommodate turning movements from every direction. So there's a number of benefits to this design. One, from just an organizational standpoint, it will very clearly tell people where they should be. It will provide shorter crossing distances and more protection for pedestrians. It will provide space for people riding a bike to go in both directions. And it will help with the efficiency and organization of school pickup drop-off operations. So I think from here, we'll pause. It's about 6:50. And Molly or Brad or Alderwoman, if there's anything anything I missed or that you guys want to jump in, please feel free. If not, I think we can get into taking a look at any questions that haven't been addressed.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Brad, I know you've been monitoring the Q&A. How's that looking? What are the burning questions?
Yeah, give me a minute, Dave. I've been writing down the common questions here. First one we got a couple related to just school operations. I know you touched on it a little bit. So one, maybe if you can just kind of repeat coordination done with schools, and a lot of questions on kind of where their pickups and drop-offs can happen. Can they be moved to other streets? So I'll let you just touch on the school coordination bit.
That sounds good. Like I mentioned, we've got the Haight School at Clark Street and then Northside Academy at Glenwood. We've had multiple meetings on site with both schools, and that will continue between now and the completion of the project and afterwards. In terms of the Catholic Academy at Glenwood, they do a lot of their pickup and drop off on Glenwood, and then have people filter out of the neighborhood from there. I know there's a lot of excitement around, as I mentioned, the raised crosswalk that'll be happening in the front of the school. Their attendance numbers are a lot smaller than the Haight School. So a lot of the pickup and drop off activities will happen very similar to how they're happening today, but we'll keep working with the school to see as their attendance numbers grow in the coming years, are there things that make sense to be done. I think that there were someone from the ward office can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there was also some discussions around some of the sign regulations around North Side Academy as well, just to help clarify pickup and drop off areas. But with the hate school, it's a little bit more complicated with a bigger school. And with the attendance boundaries, extending to the west, there are a lot of students that are walking and riding a bike to get to school. And this will be greatly improved. That'll be greatly improved through this project. In terms of parents picking up and dropping off via automobile, the drop off in the morning occurs mostly on the Granville side on the north curb, but then for younger students on the west side of Greenview. And so the circulation will, parents will come in either from Greenview or from Tome on the north side of the school and circulate around to drop off their student at Greenview or onto Granville. And then in the afternoon, a lot of pickup activities happen on the north side of the school at Tome. And so something we've been talking with the schools about is looking at both the north side of the school and the east side of the school to see if there are, do any additional traffic calming measures make sense? Are there any additional signage or temporary installations that make sense to help during pickup and drop off to help facilitate it a little bit more? Because especially on the Greenview side, that's also a narrow street with parking on the east side. So once parents drop off on either Greenview or Granville, it will be very easy for them to circulate out of the neighborhood on Granville as an example, and then to go north or south on Clark Street. So I think it's going to be a lot more organized. If there are buses parked on the north side of the street, you won't have the eastbound traffic on Granville to compete with, and parents will be able to get circulated out of the neighborhood a lot easier.
Thanks, Dave. Got a bunch of questions. I want to try to get to a number of these, Dave. Let's see. A number of questions just regarding emergency response, emergency services, use of Granville. A number of folks asking about if fire trucks and emergency services are permitted to go down one-way streets. And then maybe if you could touch on a little bit how the conceptual designs from the last meeting have changed at some of these bigger intersections to better accommodate those movements.
Sure. So the short answer is yes, emergency vehicles will be able to operate in both directions, even with the one-way designation. This is something that is pretty common throughout the city. And since at the first meeting, those intersection designs that we had presented were, as you mentioned, Brad, a bit more conceptual in terms of the specific geometry of how every intersection has been designed. What we're showing tonight is more representative of really how this will be implemented and what this will look like. And we've refined and honed in on those designs by incorporating what we would call a design vehicle, where we essentially model the largest fire truck in the fire department's fleet and model all them turning from every direction, including going the opposite direction of the one-way designation. And that's how we build out where we can implement a pedestrian refuge island or a pedestrian safety feature so that it doesn't conflict with those turning movements from emergency vehicles. As I mentioned, I think a big benefit in terms of emergency access is going to be the simplification and better organization of the most hectic intersections. If you go out to Granville and Clark Street, which most of you have and are doing all the time, you see that it is really, really hectic as a two-way street with everything that's going on between within the community, within the school, within people using the street as a cut through traffic. It's very difficult to navigate in both directions. So I think there's a lot of benefit here for all users, from somebody pushing a stroller to somebody operating an emergency vehicle.
Thanks, Dave. A number of questions asking about is something like the use of speed cameras an option or an alternative on Granville or a project like this?
Well, there's a separate, I'd say in terms of speed cameras, there's a separate process that the city goes through to evaluate those locations. There's regulations around speed cameras in terms of where they can be implemented with proximity to schools and parks. You generally don't see speed cameras on residential streets, more of the arterial. So I think that I would say that that is not something that is included within the scope of this project, but there is a separate process for that type of technology.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Let me see. So I know you touched on a number of folks just asking about data collection, especially throughout the neighborhood on the side streets. I know you touched on that a little bit. Could you, talk a little bit more about the things, that can be done kind of to look before and after, as well as, some of the things that were, could possibly do to mitigate anything we see there?
We've done a variety of data collections, observations, field visits out here. We've collected traffic counts at along Granville, but also have done traffic counts on the adjacent, some of the adjacent streets, the residential streets. We've collected speed data to see how fast people are driving on the street. And then we've looked at, of course, as we've presented, I think, in depth, what is happening in terms of traffic safety and traffic crashes. So all of those things will be replicating that post installation of the project. There's always an adjustment period for several months. And so where people kind of settle into new patterns and new behaviors and a new, what becomes the new normal of how people are getting around. So once that period settles in after several months, then we will recreate that data collection, see how, so we can see really the benefits of the projects in terms of making the streets safer, more accessible. Looking at bicycle counts is something that we would do. But if there are, once we do that, we'll continue the partnership with the ward offices, with the community. And if there are other streets or other areas that could benefit from something like a speed hump or a curb extension or some additional signage, we'll be well positioned to address those issues.
Thanks. Had a question on speed limit. Can't remember if you mentioned that one, Dave, but a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit full-time, not just during school hours, would be implemented as well through this project. Some questions just around the crash data and where that came from, time of analysis. Dave highlighted the hundreds of crashes on Granville. That was over a 5-year time period. That's kind of the typical time period of analysis for a project like this. That data comes directly from the Illinois Department of Transportation, who collects and provides crash data reported by every police department in the state. The 63 crashes we talked about since our last meeting, that comes directly from CPD data, which is available online at Chicago's data portal. You know, dates of things like some of the different volumes that were collected throughout the neighborhood. You know, some counts were conducted in 2023, a lot of other counts conducted in 2024 on weekdays during when school was operating to capture school traffic as well. Let me see. Dave, I think you mentioned a little bit kind of Google routing. Can you highlight kind of some of the communication that CDOT also has with Google in their map routing?
Yeah. So, you know, once traffic patterns adjust, you know, many of the other apps pick up on that relatively quickly. But something that we've done and will do for this project, we have a contact at Google that we'll reach out to let them know about the one-way designations, upload some data sets to them so that can be implemented a lot faster. And that's going to be really helpful because throughout the last year in conversations with people, we've absolutely heard, you know, well, I use Granville. Yeah, I use Granville for a long distance, and I do it just because, you know, my phone tells me to. So that'll be really important to make those changes, to get those implemented. And as I mentioned, for a variety of reasons, the routing will reflect the arterial network because that's going to be the most efficient way for people to get around.
Great, thank you. A couple of questions just around Granville to the east of Broadway and concern around business access. That section of Broadway from Broadway to Sheridan would remain as is, so that would remain a two-way. In business access, particularly to those couple of blocks, was a consideration there.
Been east of Broadway by the Red Line and the business corridor will essentially remain the same from an access and parking standpoint, but we'll restripe the crosswalks. We'll add in designated bicycle lanes that will connect into the Kenmore and Winthrop bicycle routes.
Mm-hmm. Great. And a couple of questions just around impacts to streets, other streets like Devon and Peterson. Can you maybe put into perspective the volumes streets like those two kind of see in a day compared to the volume that, you know, might the volume of trips that may kind of adjust their trip to take those streets?
So, as I mentioned, when we talk about too much traffic on Granville, it's too much traffic for the context of Granville, meaning the width of the street, and the nature of Granville as a residential street. Devon and Peterson are part of the arterial network, and so those streets, you know, carry in excess of 20,000 car trips per day, and so the amount of traffic being filtered off of Granville to the surrounding network is really a small number of trips, particularly when you start breaking it down into the busiest hours of the day. So, you know, no major impact is anticipated on any one street, including Devon and Peterson. Something that we are working on, which I'll say, on Peterson, which is a state of Illinois jurisdiction street. We are working and getting a project, some designs going around pedestrian safety improvements on Peterson. We've been working with Alder Vasquez on that, working with Senator Mike Simmons and IDOT to start that process. And then we're also in the design phase of utilizing some federal funding in order to make some traffic signal improvements along the Peterson corridor, which will include some equipment upgrades, as well as looking at the signal timing along Peterson to see if there are opportunities to better coordinate traffic flow and the traffic signals. So that'll all be happening in the next couple of years.
Great, thank you. Trying to wrap up a lot of the questions, a lot of multiple questions. Dave, I think you had mentioned too, part of what we'd be posting online after this meeting would be an FAQ addressing not only the questions from tonight, but questions from the first meeting, as well as emails in between. Let me see, I'll just kind of leave one last question. Was just around, we talked about Granville in the context of kind of overcapacity in terms of the volume of like a typical neighborhood street. Could you kind of put into perspective the the typical widths of neighborhood streets, and then the corresponding kind of range of volumes we see?
Typical residential streets like Granville and some of the surrounding ones are vary between 28 and 32 feet wide. You look at some of the streets, east-west streets adjacent to Granville, and you see traffic volumes under 1,000 per day, or up to maybe 1,500, sort of in that range. And that's low to begin with. A typical, I'd say the average for a residential street is somewhere in the 2,000 to 3,000 mark, around 2,500 or so, is what you would, expect to see.
Great, thank you. And I'll just kind of leave. I've seen a couple more come in kind of related to this one, so I'll let this be the last one for this segment of Granville. But a couple of questions just around asking if something like removing parking was considered, from one side of Granville to make room for, something like a protected bike lane or something more substantial.
Something that we looked at or considered, but really it's not something that we're proposing or moving forward with. I think that it would present a whole host of challenges within the community. It's not, it's also not typical for in terms of a scope for a neighborhood project or a neighborhood greenway type project like Granville. So, we feel really good about the elements that we've walked through, that we are addressing both issues of speed and volume and organization on the street. And so if we can do those things successfully, this is going to be a really nice route for one, for riding a bike, but really for everybody. It's going to be, better organized, safer for if you're driving your car down the street, or if you're parking your car out on Granville, less likely to get your mirrors damaged or your car to get hit. So it's going to be a benefit for everybody, especially people living in the neighborhood. But in terms of specific to a bicycle route, I think what we can achieve here through the traffic calming and through the one-way designations is really going to be a great east-west bicycle route connecting, the Kenmore Winthrop routes down to the Lakefront Trail, all the way west towards Kedzie and towards the North Shore Channel Trail. And that really, embodies what we are doing as a city around bicycling, providing long connections for large parts of the city, connecting assets like the off-street trail system, connecting to transit, connecting to commercial corridors, connecting to schools, and connecting to parks. And so that's one aspect of this that'll be, I think, really a big benefit for residents and for visitors. Okay, so I think with that, we will move on to discuss west of Clark. Alderwoman Manaa-Hoppenworth, does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who joined the meeting today. And also, this meeting, just as a reminder, is being recorded, so feel free to share it out. And I want to thank CDOT, Deputy Commissioner Dave, Brad, and the entire team for your work on this project. This project is going to address the safety in the neighborhood through infrastructure. So, as Dave was saying, it's going to cut down speed. It's going to cut down the volume of cars generally, which is going to change and transform the neighborhood dramatically, and make it safer for everyone, no matter how they get around. And it's going to feel better. It's going to be more organized, especially at the intersections, where a lot of the accidents happen, especially um, for our pedestrians. We have a lot of folks with disabilities who get around also by foot or rolling around. So we're thinking about them. We're thinking about the older adults. We're thinking about the children who go to school here. And also we're thinking about you. We're thinking about you all who are here on this call, who live in the neighborhood, who have been here for years. This is an investment into your neighborhood on your neighborhood street. This is a community street, and I don't know when's the last time we've had this much investment into a community street into our neighborhood. And the reason why is because it's a hot spot in our network, that's been identified by our department. So I just wanted to say thank you to CDOT for putting together this meeting, and also please know, for the 48th Ward and all the neighbors, I'm still available here to answer any of your questions, and we are going to compile all the questions that were not addressed today and also circle back around to you. So please feel free to connect with me at any time, either in the office, by phone, or by email. Thanks again, CDOT.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Appreciate it. So we'll move west of Clark Street, and this is where we pick up into the 40th Ward, going west of here. So I'd like to introduce Alder Andre Vasquez of the 40th Ward.
Hey, thank you, Dave. Thank you all for attending this call. We all know it's a pretty long one, but it's good that we're spending the time to cover both east of Clark Street and west of Clark Street. So I think, as many of you who are on the call have heard, much of the focus is trying to make sure that we're increasing safety, whether we're talking pedestrians of all sort, kids, seniors. Throughout the process, when we had conversations with the neighbors, the ones on Granville have definitely been vocal about the fears and concerns and how they've been impacted with the amount of crashes, the amount of close calls that they've had. So in looking at what's being proposed west of Clark, really the focus is to maximize the safety with the minimum amount of impact as far as the changes occurring. So there are some changes that are structural in nature, but really looking to balance out and disincentivize those who would use Granville as a cut-through street, because if you keep it more of a local residential area, it then becomes safer for everyone. You then see vehicles that are less incentivized to use Granville, which creates less congestion and more ability to travel for the drivers that are trying to get home, whether you're coming home or leaving home. So as with all the projects that we've done in the 40th Ward, not only do we want to get the community feedback, but we know that these are all works in progress, that ultimately what gets created will then have impact. And then we want to hear what those impacts are to figure out how best to address any other changes, right? Like, I live actually in the area. I actually live between Peterson and Granville and Ravenswood. And so thinking about what the experience might be for the other residential streets is important, which is why part of the conversation we've had with the Chicago Department of Transportation is how to address those as they occur and as we hear the feedback. So we want to make sure that this is an ongoing conversation as things are moving forward, and that we can make adjustments as needed, knowing that we first want to make sure that Granville is what it's been designated as and what it's meant to be, which is a residential street. And so we'll go forward with what's happening west of Clark. And similarly, please feel free to add the questions. We'll do our best to answer them in real time, answer whatever's left at the end, and follow up on any questions that might need more research. So thank you all so much. Thank you, CDOT, for being here, and we'll let y'all take it away.
Thanks, Alder Vasquez. Appreciate it. Okay, so we'll continue west of Clark Street, looking at what will be implemented in the summer of 2025. So starting again at the Clark Street intersection, where there's a lot of work happening, a lot of benefits around pedestrian safety, slowing down, simplifying the intersection, providing bicycle connections across the intersection. The west leg of Clark Street from Paulina to Clark Street, or the west side of the west leg of Granville from Paulina to Clark Street will be designated eastbound for general purpose automobile traffic, but will, as similar to the other segments, will include a designated contraflow bike lane for people to bike westbound. And then west of Paulina, the street will return to two-way designation with bicycle route signs and markings. Again, it's a pretty narrow street through this segment. There are some existing traffic circles at the intersections, which will remain and serve as traffic calming for the corridor. We'll restripe all of the pedestrian crosswalks, stop bars, and refresh any stop signs or other signage that is needed, including, we'll look at the corner, what we call corner clearance signs, which indicate no parking generally within 20 to 30 feet of a 20 feet of a crosswalk, 30 feet of a stop sign. And then as we get to between Ravenswood and Ridge underneath the Metro tracks, this will be our third filter in terms of traffic flow, where this section under the tracks will be designated as westbound only. So if you're traveling eastbound on Granville at this point, you would be filtered onto Ridge, going north or south to Peterson. There will be a concrete median to provide separation for bicyclists going eastbound. This is also designed for a truck to turn, emergency services to turn going eastbound here, although with the street network, with the Ravenswood on the east side of the tracks, likely less necessary. Something that we're also looking at, we've talked with Alder Vasquez about, is there's currently a no left turn sign that's posted for westbound Granville at Ridge. And so we're taking a look at that to see if that's something that is needed or not, and try to reduce some confusion there. So this one-way designation here really works in conjunction with the Western Avenue intersection, which I'll get to in a second. But again, all of these different intersections really work together as a system to reduce, discourage, and not allow cut-through traffic or really long trips, which shouldn't be happening on our residential system. So west of Ridge, you guys probably maybe just know sort of inherently from being on the street, it actually widens out a little bit west of Ridge and all the way to Kedzie. So we have a little bit more space here where we can maintain residential parking on both sides of the street, but also stripe what we call advisory bicycle lanes. And you see that to the left or to the west of Ridge, where we have these dashed bicycle lanes and symbols which designate space for people to bike eastbound and westbound. We've got a series of speed humps throughout Granville. As I mentioned, these are a little bit of a different design than a traditional speed hump. They're a lot more comfortable to ride your bike over, and really targeted at predictable driving speeds. The pavement markings that we'll be implementing here will also really help to visually narrow down the street, which in turn will result in better organization, slower speeds, reinforcing the stop signs. We've included pedestrian curb extensions at Wolcott at the entrance to Emerson Park on both in advance of both crosswalks. We'll restripe all the crosswalks, stop signs. We'll stripe a parking lane, which will really help push people or help people park up against the curb to create as much space as possible for east and westbound bicycle lanes and still have travel space in the middle. That will continue. We've got west of Damon, another speed hump. And then through Hoyne and the Hamilton intersection, same thing, the advisory bicycle lanes. These are designed so that if you have dedicated space for biking in both directions, and again, it'll really help reinforce the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit, which we'll be implementing as this project. Speed humps west of Hamilton. Then we get into Stone Elementary Academy, just to the north of Granville. Again, I know that we've heard a lot of concern around pickup and drop off safety for Stone Elementary. So this is going to be a big benefit for the school community here as well. Additional speed humps to the west of Bell. And then you get the advisory bike lanes and the striped parking lanes continue throughout this whole segment with the lowered speed limit and additional signage. And that gets us to the Claremont intersection, or 1 block west of Western. And so this is where we'll have our the fourth filter to get to filter cut-through traffic on back to the arterial network. Between Claremont and Western, the street will be designated as a one-way westbound. And similar to the other sections, we'll have a contraflow bike lane. On Western, we'll be able to construct a pedestrian refuge island on the north leg of the intersection because today that is a left turn lane. That turning movement will no longer be permitted, so we can repurpose that space for pedestrian safety. And then we're also able to implement a pedestrian refuge space on the east leg of the intersection. If you're walking north-south along Western at Granville, you'll have a much shorter crossing distance, and you'll be more visible as a pedestrian. This, as I mentioned, this westbound designation kind of works hand in hand with the one-way designation between Ravenswood and Ridge. The reason these work really nicely together is that by coupling the two, it really discourages and doesn't allow anybody to use any of the neighborhood streets going eastbound to cut through. So you won't be able to, zigzag around residential streets to get around this intersection, because just a few blocks to the east, you'll have that filter again at Ridge and Ravenswood. So these work really well together. This intersection also, this is one of the intersections that varies from the first meeting that we had in terms of the concept to actual geometry or actual design. This is also designed to accommodate larger emergency vehicles to turn in both directions. So this is going to be a huge benefit from a pedestrian standpoint, from a bicycle standpoint, and again, from just simplification and organization of the street for everybody. Now, the west leg of the intersection will remain as a two-way street. So if you're driving eastbound and you are approaching Western, you will be filtered onto Western to go north or south. If you're driving, if you're west on Granville, you'll be able to go north, south, or west, and you can see the lane designations. Once we get west of Western, there's already existing segments where parking only exists on one side of the street because the roadway then narrows back down quite a bit, even narrower than to the east of Clark Street. And so we maintain west of Western, maintain parking on the north side of the street, which is where it exists today. And then we have our system of advisory bike lanes or bicycle markings for both eastbound and westbound. On the east, for the eastbound direction, that will be against the south curb. The gray circles in the intersections, these are existing traffic circles. There have been some efforts through the ward offices over the years to implement some of these traffic circles in response to concerns from neighbors around speeding and traffic safety. And so all of these things together will work really, really well together. Speed humps continuing throughout the project. So west of Rockwell, the advisory bike lanes continue. And then again at Fair, between Washtenaw and Fairfield. And I think at this segment, this is where this is split between the 40th and 50th wards. West of here is in the 50th ward. You've got the Clinton School along the south side of the street. And you get to the California intersection. And this is where west of California, the parking actually flips today to the south side of the street. So that will all stay the same. We are looking at California implementing left turn traffic calming. This is a program that we developed a couple of years ago where we install a series of speed bumps within the middle of the roadway so that if a driver is turning left, it really forces them to slow down. As we dug into really traffic crash data, we take very much a data-driven approach. One of the big things that we saw when it comes to pedestrian injuries and pedestrian safety is that left turning motorists have really presented a threat to pedestrians. We see a lot of people, too many people crossing the street in the crosswalk with the walk signal when they should, and getting hit by a driver who is turning left through the intersection. And so this left turn traffic calming installation has been really helpful. It's had a significant reduction in overall traffic crashes. Where we've implemented it, we've seen traffic crashes go down by 25-30% after we've implemented this. And this is a program that has grown really quickly over the last couple of years. So that's something that we've heard in conversation with the community, with the ward offices, is that concerns around left turns and how that impacts students walking to the school on the south side of the street. So that will be included as part of this. And then going west here, it's very consistent with parking on the south side of the street. The advisory bike lanes continue, speed humps at the various blocks. And then this will connect into the Kedzie bicycle route, which exists today just on the west side. This is on the east side of the channel, but on the west side of the North Shore channel, you've got the trail. And so, we're building up those connections to those off-street assets. As I mentioned before, from a bicycle perspective, this is a really exciting route because streets like Peterson and Devon are really so uncomfortable to ride a bicycle on today. And this will provide a much needed, comfortable east-west connection. And even when you zoom out, you have really a big gap between, I believe, Pratt and Berwyn with east-west bicycle routes. So this project will really fill an important missing gap. Alder Vasquez, is there anything that I missed that you want me to hit, or anything that you want to jump in on before we see if there's any remaining questions?
Yeah, I mean, I've been answering them as they've kind of been coming up. I think the one that actually would love to hand it over to you all was this one. I'll read it from Finn Hardy. I can't say I agree with everything proposed. Wait, sorry. The question was about, okay, here we go. I can't say I agree with everything proposed, but I want to keep an open mind about these one-way sections and understand the idea of safety behind them. As someone who's been hit and run while on a bike on Granville, I'm happy to see changes being proposed. My question is why the one-way west on Granville between Ravenswood and Ridge, so at the viaduct? This one seems, to this quote, seems frivolous and does not seem to serve the same purpose as the others. So any clarification would be appreciated.
And hey, Dave, while you answer that, had a couple other questions, just wanting a little clarification on kind of where the one-way versus two-way blocks are. So maybe while you're answering this, if you could pull up that overview map we had from the beginning, I think that'll help you kind of get at the purpose of Ridge to Ravenswood.
Sure. So, yeah. So as I mentioned, Ridge and Western, really work as a system together. And so by implementing the one-way designation between Ridge and Ravenswood, it does a couple of things. One, it really just it doesn't allow any ability for someone to use a street like Rosemont or one of these other streets to enter into the neighborhood and continue, all the way to Clark Street or beyond. And so it really reinforces the neighborhood aspect of this and works well works well together with Western Avenue. I think by this is really what it takes to address these issues out here, is looking at this systematically and holistically. And when we look at these filters, these one-way designations, they're all strategically placed at the different more major intersections, Broadway, Clark, Ridge, and Western, because we want to have the effect of filtering those longer trips that cut through traffic onto the arterial network versus filtering those onto another residential street. And so when we look at the different traffic patterns in the street network, by targeting these four intersections in this way, it really gives us the best ability to find the right balance between preserving neighborhood access, but also reducing the amount of cut-through traffic. I think if you look at Ridge, and if you were to, in terms of the one-way designation, by making that a westbound street, it really helps in terms of preserving access for the neighborhood, but discouraging those longer cut-through trips.
Great. Dave, we've had a couple more questions come in, so I want to hit on some of those. I've seen a couple of people talk about the traffic circles, since we had a couple of segments that had them. Maybe I'll just kind of answer this. I know we had a couple asking about why not more traffic circles, or we've wanted them in the past. The challenge with traffic circles on residential streets is they need a certain width to be able to install. So where Granville is narrower, especially through Edgewater, Granville is not actually wide enough to allow things like a school bus or a fire truck to turn around a traffic circle. So the kind of width of not only the street, but the intersection, so the street plus the intersecting street, really dictates the challenges with where we could install traffic circles. And I'll let Dave get a little bit of a water break. He's been talking for a little while. I'll answer a couple more of these newer questions I've seen come in until he gets back. I had a couple of questions. David mentioned kind of some of the speed humps and proposed locations. So the type of speed humps that we would be proposing on this project is something called a sinusoidal speed hump. What that means is that's a very fancy way of saying it's a much smoother and gradual slope to it. The idea with those speed humps is they encourage more of a consistent, slower speed. Something like they're designed for about a 15 mile per hour speed to be driven over, which is much different than kind of a traditional speed hump we might see in Chicago, which really forces you to stop and go very slow over them. And the behavior that we see is typically people will stop, go very slow over them, and then speed up to get to the next intersection. These speed humps here for this project are meant to encourage a much more consistent speed along the corridor. This is another question we've had. We didn't get to it in the first section, but I saw another question of it, so we'll address it here. In addition to the 5 years of crash data we presented at the first meeting, we had new crash data since our last meeting. We had questions in terms of what is the distribution of all those crashes. And so looking at kind of where those crashes were along the corridor, what we saw really is a pretty even distribution between the really the three kind of thirds of the project. We saw a pretty even distribution of west of Western, Western to Clark, and then Clark to Sheridan. So those crashes are happening all over the corridor, not just within one specific neighborhood. Dave, when you were, if you could maybe go to the Western intersection, this is another something else that folks have kind of mentioned, and I think we can kind of even mention kind of our own observations out here and what this design would help mitigate there. And so we've seen a lot of folks ask about just the flow of traffic out from a street like Western or Clark. A lot of folks kind of commenting that those streets already back up today when cars are waiting for the green to hit. I know that it's definitely something we noticed out on the corridor is this intersection in particular would back up a block or two. And so, with the addition, currently today, Granville heading westbound, there's one single travel lane to accommodate all movements there, left turns, throughs, as well as rights. And so, this same treatment is available at Clark too, where we are providing multiple lanes, not only so that we can kind of separate right turns and left turns, and therefore allow more vehicles to kind of get through that existing green and kind of clear out a little faster and more efficiently. And when we look at this space, the left turn and right turn space, what that does is provide a much wider space for cars to pull over in the event that emergency vehicles do need to turn down the street at some of these intersections. Let me see. Let's see. I had the Ridge and Ravenswood one that the alderman mentioned, so we will hit on that. Let's see. again, some questions around parking and potential parking loss. So residential parking removal is not something proposed with this project.
Yeah, there's Brett, there's a question. Can the one-way be modified by Western and Claremont? So the one-way begins at the alley between Western and Claremont, so the residents on Claremont can get out of the alley easier, is the question.
Okay. That is, we can certainly take a second look there at that. That is not kind of a typical layout in terms of changing the orientation of a street kind of mid-block. So creates a little more challenges or concerns around, folks maybe pulling out and going the wrong direction. Let me see. And Dave, let me see. I've got a few more. We had a couple questions just around, complete streets projects as a whole. A couple of folks have mentioned different protected bike lanes and bike projects from the neighborhood and what those impacts and results of those actually are, and who kind of benefits in terms of safety improvements. So I'll kind of address this, throughout the city of Chicago, and Molly Samadi, our deputy commissioner, touched on kind of some of the complete streets efforts, really considering all users of the road, earlier at the meeting. But when you look at a lot of these projects on larger streets, the questions were around Clark and other arterial streets. When you look at the projects we've done where we've made it, safer, more convenient, more comfortable to ride a bike or to walk across the street or to get to the bus stop, what we've seen after the fact is we've seen crashes going down for all users, and that's been consistent over a number of different projects. And more importantly, we've seen injuries go down. Sometimes we'll see those very minor property damage crashes remain pretty similar, but the stark difference is the significant decrease we see in pedestrians getting hit by cars, with people biking getting hit by cars, with motorists being in severe crashes. And again, that's really reinforced by some of the opening comments we had earlier today around citywide. Since 2021, the city of Chicago has seen a 27% decrease in traffic fatalities compared to a 5% decrease nationwide. Let's see. I think, we've got a lot of the similar kind of questions as our first session. I think I kind of answered a lot of the, new questions. Again, a couple of folks asking about kind of where to be able to see some of these graphics. And again, these materials will be posted online, as well as a video recording of this presentation as well. Alderman, you've been pretty active in the Q&A, so I appreciate it because there's been a lot coming in. Was there anyone in particular that caught your eye that maybe we didn't address yet tonight?
No, I mean, some of them are more kind of comments and like appreciation that we're answering the questions, so we're happy to do so. I think in order to reiterate for some folks, there isn't a loss of parking. There aren't protected bike lanes, so the bikes lanes are paint. They're not taking up any of the width of the street in any way that would impede kind of the regular drive that occurs. I think that's kind of. Oh, can you define severe in terms of traffic crashes? I think I can do this, but there's a difference between like a fender bender, you bump into a car in front of you, which is technically a crash, and something that like completely ruins your vehicle because somebody's driving 35 miles an hour plus, or the kind of crash that actually could injure or kill somebody because of speed and velocity. That's a different kind of crash than you know, you skid it, like today might have been enough, you skid on the ice, you bump into the car in front of you, but no one's hurt, right? There might be a dent in a car, but there's a difference in the level of crash that we're talking about. And so when some of the questions came up, for example, on Clark Street about, you know, the increase or the difference in the number of car crashes, there might be more from cars bumping into each other, but they're not the sort where somebody's being hurt and you've got to get an ambulance because of the speed with which someone was driving. So similarly, again, by looking at how one can disincentivize some of that speeding, some of that cut through traffic by folks who don't live in the area, the thought process is that you have less people taking up Granville, and then that makes it actually less congested for people who live in the area to try to get home. So although you might make an extra number of turns, over time, right, as people know not to use Granville, it doesn't increase the time it takes to get home because you have less cars taking up the street. So that's some of it. But again, not that it's conjecture because this has been done in other streets, but it's something where we want to make sure we're communicating with each other so we're hearing what the impacts are on different streets and can help address those.
Alder, and I'll just add to that. You know, the severity of the crash is something that is reported by the Chicago Police Department with every traffic crash, and so we look at that very closely. And just to reiterate what we talked about at the top, these types of improvements, advisory bike lanes, curb extensions, refuge islands, traffic calming, all of this are approaches that are working across the city with incredible success. We are reducing, when we talk about the most serious crashes, those that are a result in somebody losing their life or somebody going to the hospital or seriously injured, we're seeing those crashes go down significantly. And a big part of that is because of the infrastructure that we're implementing, the policies and processes that are being adopted within the city, and the partnerships across city departments, city council, and community groups across the city.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also, as I'm seeing some of the comments here, there's one that's like put in speed bumps and put in concrete bike lanes since the bike lanes won't take up space. The bike lanes would take up space if you're adding concrete. That's why it's not. But I think it speaks to something that I think some people had trepidation about, thinking that this was all about creating a bike-centered street or just cyclists. It's really not. It's about pedestrian safety first and foremost. And it's in a world where the cyclists aren't getting every single thing that they want. The drivers are experiencing some change also, because we're really trying to center kids, seniors, and the folks who are trying to cross the street and making that as safe as possible. So I think, you know, it is challenging when streets have been built so car-centric to then have to pivot in a way that rebalances things. And so we do recognize that, you know, that although we're getting into progress, some people may not like change at all. And so we are trying to figure out the most responsible way to go about it. So if you've got questions or ideas about certain blocks or intersections, please do send that our way. Make sure you can email it to our office. We'll forward it up to CDOT, for example, like the alley suggestion or some other ones that we may not have taken into account because you're living there. It's good to hear all of that so we can address it. So thank you all so much for the time. I'm glad that we were able to have like the multitude of conversations and then this meeting today. And we'll continue to keep folks updated as it moves forward. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Take care. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more info as we get closer to implementation this summer. Thank you.
Thank you.